Hello and welcome to Swedish Kaiser Reacts. This is a channel in which I will react to certain videos with topics that I find interesting and explain my thoughts on those topics. I think I will put out maybe 1 or 2 videos a day, at least that's the goal. I may take breaks sometimes, but that's the general goal. And I will begin today with this video from AlternateHistoryHub. What if Germany won World War I? So, without further ado, let's get started.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty.
A victory for the Kaiser.
World War I was called the war to end all wars. Europe was now at a new age, a crisis, where tradition and the modern day were increasingly at odds. Industrialization progressed faster than the mentality did. The old noble ways of gentleman war clashed with the brutal reality of the trenches, and because of this, millions died. World War I was the war to end them all, because this was the last time the old European ideals would fight, the last time monarchies would reign. From who won and lost, new ideas replaced them for this industrial world, like fascism and communism.
Yeah, this is like basically the idea of World War I, in which new technologies come on, and like he explains, in some ways it was the end, the war to end all wars, because, or not end all wars of course, but to end the usual conflict. Especially with monarchies from Germany and Austria-Hungary being powerful, and flushing in a new age with industrialization being very important and technological advancement as well. So, yeah, so far so good.
Simply put, it set the stage for the next. Germany in our timeline brought Russia into civil war, caused immunity in France, and almost broke the Allies in 1917. Before you know, America. It was just...
Yeah, this is true that America came in and basically saved the Allies, you can say, actually, because Russia had withdrawn from the war at the end of World War I. So Germany had only the Western Front to focus on. So without America bringing in millions of men there, I doubt Germany, or I doubt the Allies would have been able to stop Germany, actually. Especially with all of those Eastern troops coming in. So, but we'll see what topic he brings up, or what alternate scenario he brings forth here.
Just by bad decisions that we saw a 20th century of American ascendance, when it easily could have become the German century. Only question is, what would this look like? What if in an alternate timeline, Germany and the Central Powers won World War I? Let's go back to 1914, with the assassination of Austrian royalty Franz Ferdinand. Ferdinand was dead by the hands of a Serb nationalist, and the dominoes began to fall into place. Treaties certainly forced a lot of countries to declare war for their allies. There is one military decision that Germany made that almost certainly lost them the entire war: invading Belgium. France had built up their military...
So this is interesting. I can see where this is going now. So Germany invaded Belgium in order to circumnavigate the French border and get close to Paris and end the war in the West quicker, because their theory was that it would take longer to defeat Russia than to defeat France, while in reality they actually defeated Russia before they defeated France in reality. So the Schlieffen plan, as it was called, was kind of lacking in seeing how the reality actually was at the time. But Belgium was therefore invaded, and this actually made Britain join in on the side of the Allies, probably because of Belgium. So I guess you can say that because of that, Germany lost the war. But also it's kind of hard to get how they would change such a thing. I mean, the consensus at the time was kind of steady that France would be defeated this way. So, for me, a Central Powers victory, I would say, is more likely at the later stages of the war, not in the early stages. So yeah, but we'll see what he
border in anticipation for a German attack. Germany, however, had a plan, the Schlieffen Plan. Bypass the French defenses on the border by invading through Belgium, which was undefended. By going around this meat grinder, the Germans would have easy access to Paris. Well, that's not so bad. Belgium's tiny. They can't defend themselves. But Germany ignored that Belgium had one key friend, the British. And the British had one single condition that it stressed shouldn't be violated. Don't violate Belgian neutrality. Germany, in a Prussian fashion, believed more in military action than diplomatic consequences, and marched anyway. It was this single act that brought on the wrath of the British Empire, redefining the absolute scale this war would be fought on. The British would block German ports and cut the transatlantic cable between the United States and Germany. In this alternate timeline, for Germany to not lose the war, one major step is it simply doesn't invade Belgium.
Yeah, he is right that Great Britain was important in that way, in that it blockaded Germany from access to the sea, which probably wouldn't have happened without them joining in, because French naval capabilities was kind of limited in that way, especially when Britain, being neutral, would probably like to trade with Germany, or possibly, maybe. But he's still not really considering that Britain might still have joined the war, even if Germany didn't attack Belgium. There's no way for Germany to know if Britain would join the war just because they attacked the French. Really? I mean, Belgium was definitely the last straw, but they could have joined just when Germany attacked France. So, yeah, I'm not sure this is the best way to get a Central Powers victory, but we'll see. We'll see exactly what he brings forth later on, but I'm a bit skeptical at this point.
By doing this, Germany avoids immediate conflict with Britain. Now, this doesn't guarantee the Brits would stay out of it. Keep in mind a Central Power victory would cement German dominance in Europe, and we can't have that. But without a provocation, though, this would buy Germany enough time to gain a major advantage over France. Even if it was a year before Britain entered, it was 4 years of trench warfare between the British and French combined against Germany alone.
Yeah, that's true, but I do think he's underestimating the impact Belgium had on that when in a strategical sense. Only fighting on that tiny front would have been much more easy for the French to defend. They actually had a plan called Plan 16 where they would push forward in a bit into Germany, taking Strasbourg and a place like that. So, and also in the Battle of Marne in early stages of the war in 1914, it was mainly the French who held off the Germans. Most historians consider the French, or they do not consider the British impact there to have been decisive in favor of the Allies, at least from what I have seen. So, yeah, it's alternate history we're talking about, but again, I do want to stress the point that I'm not sure this would be a guaranteed Central Powers victory. And even if it was, I mean, it wouldn't be a world war in the same sense either, because many of the colonies that the fighting were British, and the Allies wouldn't have the same control of the sea, so it would have been an entirely different war, maybe just more limited to European continent as well. So it's interesting theory, but I'm skeptical towards it.
France alone wouldn't even have the population to sustain a German offensive. So in this alternate timeline, Germany's military keeps France at bay through a small border they share at Alsace-Lorraine, while the majority of their forces fully mobilize against Russia, aiding their Austrian allies. Whether or not this alternate strategy would work, who knows, but it does solve the whole keep Britain out of the war thing.
Okay, so they are doing that. They're mobilizing against Russia. Again, this goes directly against the Schlieffen Plan. So I do not think this would have been realistic. You would have to change the Germans' whole strategic thinking, since the late 19th century, going into the early 20th. So this was not something that would happen. You couldn't change that just like that. Germany couldn't have made such a decision. And either way, they if they didn't have the Schlieffen Plan either, they wouldn't have to attack France. So it's not sure that France even would have joined the war at this point. Because remember, it was Russia that made a guarantee to Serbia when Austria-Hungary threatened Serbia. And so Germany only attacked France because their war plan against the Russians had them crushing the French first, then deal with the Russians. But if their war plan was not to deal with the French first, it's not sure that Germany would have declared war on France. Probably not at that point. So, yeah.
No matter what German military strategy is, resentment is still assured against the Tsar. Revolution can still undermine the Russian war effort like in our timeline, and force the Russians to negotiate. I'll focus on this aspect in a bit. The German forces on the Eastern Front now come to the west. Millions of troops fighting in a small area until one side finally breaks. And without Britain, that side is most likely France. Germany then invades. In our timeline, Germany almost destroyed the French defense in 1917, before the Americans arrived. So it wouldn't be long before the French simply can't defend themselves and are pushed back. Soon, Paris falls. The war in the West and the East is officially over. Both sides tried to fight Germany and lost. Would Britain just sit back and allow Germany to beat two nations in a war, achieving complete dominance over mainland Europe? Probably not. They'd declare war. It's unlikely, however, that they'd win. As the British were the masters of the sea, the Germans were the dominant military of the land. It's doubtful Britain alone could put a dent in the German occupation.
No, they definitely couldn't do that, but maybe they would have joined just when the Russians collapsed. After the Russians collapsed in this scenario, which I'm not really in agreement with being possible. I mean, I'm not against alternate histories generally. I do think that both World Wars, World War I and II, could have gone a different direction. But this particular scenario does not seem that convincing to me. With Britain just staying out of it entirely, I'm very skeptical, and I'm also very skeptical about the Germans just changing their plans and then declaring war on France. Yeah.
America would simply stay out of the war. In exchange for a ceasefire...
Yeah, America was far more likely to stay out of the war. They probably would have, if a combination of factors would have been in that direction. Mainly, maybe the Kaiser wouldn't have allowed for unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917. Again, in early 1917. Maybe they wouldn't have joined. And the Zimmermann telegram was also an important aspect to it. So them joining was definitely not a sure thing. So I agree with that at least.
The agreement is made very similar to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. In just one signing of a document, Germany and Austria-Hungary seized Poland, the Baltic states.
Yeah, Brest-Litovsk, this was actually a treaty that did happen in real life. But it was only in effect for under a year, since the Germans got defeated in the West. Or, yeah, the Allies didn't actually push into Germany, but they signed a treaty after they lost a lot of land to the Allies with American help there in the West. So, but yeah, Brest-Litovsk did happen in real life. It gives you a clue on what the Germans were thinking when it comes to the continuation of the imperial state, if they had actually come out victorious.
Belarus, and all of the Ukraine and Crimea. By 1918, most of Europe is now either a Germanic puppet or in the Empire.
Podcasting is no longer a budding media experiment. Today, it's a mainstream.
Why would they do this? Germany feared Russian dominance. Russia for centuries was this backwater European wannabe. It had size and manpower, but was woefully poor and far behind technologically. In the last few decades, something changed. It began industrializing rapidly, and if Russia fully industrialized, there was no defeating them. By seizing their valuable lands, diplomatically by military agreement, Germany legally can neuter the Russian state. Quarter of their population, now German. Most of their coal, now German. But this is just the beginning.
Yeah, this would definitely happen since it's basically what they did in real life, so of course that would happen.
If there's one thing Slavs don't like, it's being invaded and occupied. So the 2 million German troops in the east now face a guerrilla war against insurgents, including ones funded by the Soviets. France is blamed for putting the worst of the reparations on Germany, but it's not like Germany would be so kind if they were in the same position. In this alternate timeline, Germany keeps Alsace-Lorraine. They impose massive amounts of war reparations, and the French people have to deal with a brief German occupation.
Yeah, that would definitely happen, although you could argue for it being less amount of reparations than was put on Germany in Versailles Treaty because of Germany maybe being more aggressive than the French at least, or at least than the Western powers were. But again, it's just speculation at this point.
Imagine France at this time. They had lost 2 wars now to the new German Empire, basically powerless to stop a state that was practically brand new. It's not hard to imagine elements of French society would be resentful against the Germans. Does this mean we'll have an alternate French Hitler? Probably not. Even if France actually did have a French Hitler, they just don't have the power.
I mean, yeah, this is an interesting conversation to have. I would imagine that someone akin to Hitler would rise up in France. It could be anything from a radical left-wing ideology, since they were very popular, even up to Second World War, actually.